Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead, it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
It's week 10. There are 6 teams on bye. Half the league is injured. All hell has broken loose. And welcome, everyone, to the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake, joined alongside Establish the Runs, Dwain McFarland. Dwain, what's going on out there, brother? Welcome to week 10.
Man, I just can't believe it, Drake, but it's week 10. Time flies. It was a good weekend for me. I think it was a good weekend for both of us, right? I mean, you went to the Eagles game. Mm-hmm. You guys hung on to beat that crappy, Bears quarterback.
That's right.
The Cowboys beat another quarterback that just likes to turn the ball over all the time. So yeah, had a good weekend.
Hell yeah, man. Welcome in everybody. We appreciate you guys who are watching us out there on Facebook and on YouTube and Periscope, and that's all really sweet. So we appreciate that. And because of the great people who listen and watch this show every week, we're growing, and we're growing thanks to you folks. And because of that, we've got a great new sponsor on the show, and it's Fantasy Draft. And Fantasy Draft, as I hope you guys know, and if you don't, you're going to over the rest of the season, is the only RAKE-free daily fantasy site in the business. These guys bring the heat again this weekend because they've got a $300,000 guaranteed free contest. There's no rake. They're not like these other guys who are taking 30%, put it in their pockets, none of that. 100% of the money going in is coming back out. So for week 10, you can win $300K. Fantasy Draft is the place to do it. We want you to go over there, download the app. There's no management fees. There's none of this nonsense. Use our promo code FFHustle. That's going to get you in. And for a limited time, you can play in these contests with no management fees. You can get in on the promotional contest. You can get in on our personal FF Hustle League game, which if you follow my Twitter account and Dwayne's, we just tweeted out. So 25 of you can play against us in the first ever Fantasy Draft Fantasy Football Hustle contest. It's only a couple of bucks to get into. I want to see who comes out and wins this. So get on board. FF Hustle's the promo code over at Fantasy Draft. We'd love to have you there. Thanks so much to those guys for jumping on board with us. We'll be talking about them a lot as we go through the next few weeks here. We are also proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. So now that we've got all the pleasantries out of the way, Dwayne, let's get into it. And let's just come off with the news that's breaking here on Tuesday afternoon as we tape. Cam Newton has been sent to the injured reserve. Kind of expected, I think. That Liz Frank injury wasn't getting any better. So there's so many Allens playing quarterback, Dwayne. There's like 15 freaking guys who are Allens.
There's 3.
It's out of control now. So Cam's done. Forget about him. How do you think this affects their offense? Is there any change? Are you looking to buy any of these receivers at the trade deadline?
No, I mean, I think we have a good feel, right, for what this is. I mean, if you look at Kyle Allen,
just pick an Allen,
and what he's done: 260 yards, 230 yards, 180 yards, 227 yards, 158 yards, 230 yards. His fantasy ranks have been 6, 24, 20, 15, 30, and 16. So, you're not really expecting a lot. He's definitely much more of a game manager. He's had 2 games where he hasn't thrown a touchdown pass. He's had 3 games where he's thrown multiple. He's had 1 game where he's just thrown 1. So it's not something where we've got a guy that's going to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns every week. But they've got an offense that works, and they really, it's a pretty evenly distributed offense. But the guy to own, if you want to own someone in the offense, is still definitely, Curtis Samuel. And the reason why is Curtis Samuel is getting, he gets all of the high leverage play, Drake. So he's the guy getting targeted down the field. He has the most air yards on the team. He's the guy that's getting targeted in the end zone the most as well. If you look at he versus DJ Moore, he's got 5 end zone targets versus DJ Moore has 0. So while DJ Moore has 23% of the target share and Curtis Samuel has 21%, Samuel's looks are so much more high leverage that he's the guy to own, because if you're dealing with an offense where you're dealing with balance every week and it's kind of a, spread out evenly, for the most part, you want the guy that's getting those end zone targets, and you want the guy that's getting the most air yards. And so Samuel's leading the team with 38% of the air yards. His average depth of target is 16 versus 11 for DJ Moore.
if you're getting paid $50 million guaranteed, there shouldn't be much of a debate whether or not you're going to get your job back. And that's what we found out today is Nick Foles has been named the starter for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Minshew mania, I guess Dwain has come to an end, and it's sad to see with that sweet, sweet stash. So for now, going forward, old Big Dick Nick is in the fold for the Jags. And to me, being that they're on a bye this week, along with the Broncos, Texans, Patriots, Eagles, and Redskins, this to me signals buy low if you can on D.D. Westbrook. If you remember in the preseason, he was the apple of Nick Foles' eye. And after a kind of down week where he was injured and didn't play, and he was hurt the week before, I think you can get D.D. Westbrook for a song. And then maybe you've got yourself a nice wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 for the fantasy playoffs. But your thoughts on old Nicky Foles coming back?
I mean, that's the guy that we were on to before the season started was Dede with Foles, and that really, you've already hit it. That's the way it was playing out. It will be interesting to see what this does to DJ Chark. So I'm going to be cautiously optimistic. I own Chark in several spots. He's definitely surprised us, so I'm hoping that Foles can keep that rolling as well. But yeah, coming off of a bye, he probably is the guy, to target. We've got to make sure that Westbrook's going to be healthy. He's got a neck issue. He's got a shoulder issue. But if he's healthy, to your point, he could be a steal. I mean, he's second on the team in targets. As of right now, he's tied with Leonard Fournette. Chark's at 21%. So it's another team that kind of spreads the ball around across a lot of different guys. I don't anticipate that changing a lot. But would it surprise me if D.D. Westbrook, for the rest of the season was up around 22, 23% target share? No, I think that's within the realm of realistic expectations.
Mark Walton was suspended 4 games, so just when we all got hyped up about Mark Walton, he's gone. Kalen Ballage, I guess he's going to take over. Kalen Ballage just isn't super talented. But Dwayne, let me say this. I listen to a ton of fantasy podcasts and radio shows and you name it. And everyone today is going to be pissing on Kalen Ballage, okay? What did we see a week ago with Kenyon Drake? Everyone said, you can't play him. He's no good. No time to learn the offense. Bah, 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 bah. What did he do? He came out and he dominated, and he had a great week. I'm not saying Kalen Ballage is Kenyon Drake because I don't think he is. But let's slow down on this guy's unplayable. If he's the starting running back in any offense in the NFL, that's viable, okay? Especially in week 10 with 6 teams on bye.
Yeah, I mean, I see it both ways. I agree with you. The volume's probably going to be there. I don't see how it won't be at this point, but he is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's really, really bad. The Kenyon Drake thing, and I know what you're saying there. But it's just a much better offense with the Cardinals,
Mm-hmm.
Now I will say Miami is at least representable these last several weeks with, Ryan Fitzpatrick has brought them into at least, low-end starter conversations around some of the skill players. I mean, we saw several guys get involved this weekend. Unfortunately, Preston Williams ended up getting hurt, but he was having a great game. And now we've got Devontae Parker. If you look at him over the last several weeks, he's actually been somebody that, can score a few fantasy points. He scored in a PPR setup 17, 12, and then 16. So, yeah, I mean, I think as long as Fitzpatrick stays, the quarterback, that would be my caveat. If you're really in a pinch, you can use Kalen Ballage. He's not a guy that I'm going to be seeking to, target, with a lot of my, free agent dollars. Now, I mean, of course, we are at the point in the season where it's like, your blind bidding money is you only can use it so many more weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're heading into week 10. So, I mean, it's if you've got a bunch of money left, and you want to be aggressive, you can. He's just somebody that I'm not going to be targeting a lot. Just like Mark Walton. It was the same thing for him last week.
Devontae Parker, you mentioned, Mike Gesicki, who went 6 for 95. With Preston Williams now injured and done for the year, are those two guys? I mean, I think if Devontae Parker's on your waiver wire, he should be a priority ad. He's going to see a ton of looks. What do you think of Gesicki?
Yeah, I would rather own those two guys than Ballage personally, just because I do think they have a little bit more, in the talent, department. Not that they're both great players. They've both so far underperformed their draft position for sure. But yeah, I like those two guys. Gesicki, his snaps didn't really change. His routes per dropback didn't change. He's hovering right around 69% the last 2 weeks. He's at 62% for the season. But it's just really the factor is with Preston Williams gone, he's probably now at least number 2 in the pecking order. He and Parker are probably going to rotate. This could open up some things for Albert Wilson as well. But really, Wilson has been splitting time, with Hearns and Jakeem Grant. And so until we see something else, change there to where we figure out who is really going to be the replacement for Preston Williams, it's hard to say who to put your dollars on outside of Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki.
All right, so what we're going to do here, guys, is we're going to bounce around team to team. That's how we're going to get the knowledge out of Dwain from his utilization reports that you read over at establishtheRun.com. So as we go team to team, we'll hit on the waiver wire guys. When we get to certain positions, maybe we'll just kind of clump people together. But we find it better this way, as we can just go team to team, hit the receivers, the tight ends, the backs, whatever. You get all the useful information that Dwayne's got locked up there in his head. So let's go right into it with the Steelers. And I guess there was no doubt that Jalen Samuels was going to be the play, especially in DFS. He didn't come through on the ground at all, but it didn't matter because he had 13 for 73 through the air. Holy smokes. And then Trey Edmonds out of nowhere got 12 attempts and ran for 73 yards himself. So we're not exactly sure what's going to happen here with James Conner in the backfield, but Trey Edmonds pickup? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's worth throwing a few dollars on, especially if you're the James Conner owner. It's going to be tough to play him, but we do have, one of these crazy weeks coming up where we've got 6 teams on bye next week. You've got Denver, Houston, Jacksonville, New England, Philadelphia, Washington are all on bye. And then the following week, you've got a few other really good offenses with Green Bay and Seattle on bye. Then you've also got the Giants and Tennessee. So the latest that I heard this morning is, the Steelers are hopeful that, Conner, that his shoulder – the way I read it was will perk up, over the course of this week, and maybe they can use him. But if you're the Conner owner, then I think grabbing Edmonds, makes sense. As far as talking about Jalen Samuels, goes, yeah, I mean, with him right now, he's a key piece to the passing attack, and that's the way that they want to use him. They did allow Trey Edmonds to lead the team, like you said, in the rushing, attempts. So it's almost like, kind of like an Austin Eckler / Melvin Gordon type situation that you've got going on. And Samuel is really the Eckler, in this particular situation. And really even, probably above that, because I wouldn't put Trey Edmonds in the Melvin Gordon department, as far as his percentage of the rushing attempts. But he had 48%, last week. Samuels had 32%. But the key thing was the targets, like you talked about. He ran a route on 84% of Mason Rudolph's dropbacks. He was targeted on 37% of the throws. And so Mason Rudolph has had a few games like this, Drake, this year. If you look back at week 3, week 4, and then this past week, week 9, where they just weren't able to push the ball vertically down the field. And that's really, if you look at, the Colts defense, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to take away the big plays. It's a bend but don't break style of defense. And so they really forced the Steelers to check the ball down, and Samuels was a huge beneficiary of that. The other guy who's trending upward, Drake, is a guy that we liked before the season started with Vance McDonald. So his snaps have gone from 77 to 81%. His routes per drop back, 89 and 92%. Those are the 2 highest marks we've seen on the year for him, and 11 and 17%. So remember, he's really been dealing with a shoulder injury as well, for really, that happened in week 1. I think he's just now healthy, and we're seeing that with his snaps, and we're also seeing that with his routes per drop back. So you've got Juju Smith-Schuster, who's working the intermediate, areas of the field with an ADOT of 11. And then you've got, Deontay Johnson working outside and working in the intermediate area. You've got James Washington pushing down the field. He's got the highest average depth of target, Drake, his last 2 weeks, 22.7 and 16. And then McDonald's the other guy working underneath along with Samuels. So in these games where, the Steelers are forced to check the ball down, I think Vance McDonald is also going to have value along with Jalen Samuels, especially in if you're in a situation where you need someone to stream this coming week. I think Vance McDonald is a great option.
If you're playing us on Fantasy Draft, Jalen Samuels this week, 11,200. It's kind of a mid-priced running back you can get in. Now, the Patriots took one on the chin this week, their first loss of the season. And to me, the most amazing stat came out was Mohamed Sanu, along with Julian Edelman, played 100% of the snaps. That is incredible. I was watching this game on my iPhone. Thank you, NFL.com app. That thing is fantastic. Watched the entire game on the drive from Philadelphia back to Syracuse. That was awesome. You've got N'Keal Harry set to return. Sanu, 14 targets, went 10 for 81 and a touchdown, had 51% of the air yards for the Patriots. Wow. That is astonishing, Dwayne. How big of a piece of the puzzle he became in really just his second week on the team. Where do you see this going forward? And how does this fit with Harry and Dorsett and all these other guys?
Yeah, I think Edelman, Sanu, and Dorsett, and we talked about this last week, I think that's your primary 3 wide receiver set. And we saw Jacoby Myers snaps drop all the way to 1%, right? So,
wow.
Yeah, Philip Dorsett was at 99%. And then, as you mentioned, the other 2 guys were at 100%. The other guy that was at 100% of the snaps, Drake, was Benjamin Watson.
Interesting.
So this guy has gone from being dropped to being picked back up and now playing, almost all the snaps. And think about this. This is the first time that the Patriots have really been in any kind of trailing game script. So this tells us basically it's a limited data point. But when we look at the rest of the roster and the lack of ability, I think this pretty much is what it is. Mm-hmm. Those are the 4 guys that you're going to see on the field the most often, along with James White at running back. So James White, if you look at his rushing attempts, he had 53% of the attempts this week. Well, why? Because they were trailing. He ran a route on only 31% of the dropbacks, which that was a killer for him. For as much as they were behind, for him to only see that number. And the reason why is, for whatever reason, that's how they got Rex Burkhead involved. So he ran a route on 35% of Tom Brady's dropbacks. But Sony Michel was basically eliminated from the game plan.
Yeah, thanks a lot as the Sony Michel owner. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so now, but this gives an example. The Patriots haven't been tested at all, right? They've had the easiest schedule, really. They've played terrible quarterbacks all the way, up until this point, except for, maybe Josh Allen is just slightly above terrible. Sorry, he's much better than a lot of these other guys that the Patriots have played again. I was just doing that for Bills Mafia. We got to have some fun. But if you look,
they'll come to your house and murder you. They will.
Yeah, yes, I know. I know. Oh man. But that's going to be the look that you're going to get if the Patriots happen to be in more competitive games where they need to throw the ball more. So I think that's a big driver behind a lot of these snaps, as well as what we saw with the running back situation as well. So yeah, I think Mohamed Sanu. Last week we talked about him being somebody that we really wouldn't prioritize putting a lot of dollars on, but I think it surprises me. And I think what we have to do now, Drake, is reset our expectations about what new players can do in offenses. Mm-hmm. Remember last year, Amari Cooper coming over, right, to the Cowboys. And historically, it's just taken time for players to get up to speed. So I don't know if it's something to do with the familiarity they may already have with the scheme. I don't know if it's something to do with coaches simplifying and, creating, a lot of packages, because that's what it doesn't seem like it is. It's not just, that's what you used to hear. We'll have some packages for them. It's like these guys are getting out here and they're playing, like you said, every snap. You already talked about Kenyon Drake earlier, and what he did with the Cardinals. Then we see what Amari Cooper did last year. Now you see what Mohamed Sanu is doing just after 2 weeks with the team. So I think we have to reset expectations about what players can do after coming over via trade and how quickly they can get up to speed. But yeah, with Sanu now, I think he's in the wide receiver 3 conversation. It's hard to not put him there. Just the areas of the field, his average depth of target, Drake, 5.2 and then 9.7 over the last 2 weeks. So he's working really in a similar area. It's Julian Edelman, 7 and 5.4. I don't know how this continues to work. And we talked about this. They really need, it's like they don't really layer the field vertically. It's all done horizontally. And so Edelman and Sanu are definitely the top 2, for Brady this past week. But I think Sanu's in play as a wide receiver 3. And then I think Julian Edelman on a week-to-week basis as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1.
Let's piggyback off that new player, new situation. Josh Gordon was claimed off waivers for the Seattle Seahawks. So my beloved Eagles could have gotten a wide receiver to help stretch the field, but we don't want to do that. We'd rather play Nelson Aguilar. So I digress. So we've got DK Metcalf is on one side of the field. You've got Tyler Lockett, who just dominates on the other side. He kicks into the slot. And then you have now Josh Gordon. How do you see him fitting in to Pete Carroll's offense, and what can we expect from him from fantasy for the rest of the way?
Man, I think it's going to be tough to gauge out of the gate, to be honest. I hope he doesn't take away, right, from these other 2 guys, because Metcalf, is playing phenomenal for a rookie. Tyler Lockett, is doing, playing great, and like you said, he kicks into the slot most of the times. what you hope you would see is that over the next 2 to 3 weeks, maybe we should say reset expectations, the next 1 to 2 weeks, he becomes that third guy that comes on the field when they go to 11. Right now, that's David Moore. And then the fourth guy is Jaron Brown. So I think at worst case, he becomes Jaron Brown. I think best case scenario, he becomes David Moore, but he could eat in a little bit into the snaps of DK Metcalf. I don't think it particularly is going to apply to Tyler Lockett because of, how much they move him around. But these last 3 weeks, Metcalf has been at 92%, 95% of the snaps. Sorry, the last 2 weeks. Then routes per dropback, 82, 96, and 94%. Lockett's been at 100, 194%. David Moore has been 43, 54, and 60%. So I think that's most likely the role where you see if Josh Gordon does crack, the lineup and get involved more. I think that's where we see it. But remember, Seattle does like David Moore. So I think it's going to be tough. And that first week, I'm definitely not going to have, Josh Gordon, on the field. And that first week that he's available for the offense, I really want to see what they're going to do with him. And then we'll have to see in that second week and go from there, which it's getting kind of late, right? I mean, we're already heading into week 10 of our season.
Yeah, it's getting late early for some of these guys. I love that you go.
Gordon's a great guy to move, right? If for some reason somebody's excited about this, oh my God, Russell Wilson and Josh Gordon, and his name just has value for some reason in your league, Josh Gordon's a guy that you go try to move right now.
Yeah, and Josh Gordon's not expensive over on Fantasy Draft if you want to get him in the lineup and play against Dwayne and I. How about the Buffalo Bills, okay? Devin Singletary has kind of taken over this back. I shouldn't say kind of. He has taken over it. 66% of the snaps. He went for had 20 carries, 140 total yards, and a touchdown. The last 2 weeks, he's outsnapped Frank Gore 81-38. So I think the torch has officially been passed in Western New York to Devin Singletary.
Yeah, and this week is very different than last week. Last week is a game where they trailed, by 18 points. And, they lost by 18 points. The margin of victory was minus 18 for the Bills. And it was really a game where they were so far down that they were using their passing game the most. They dropped back to pass 74% of the time in week 8. That's why Devin Singletary was involved. We had seen the same thing with TJ Yeldon. We had seen that with Devin Singletary earlier in the season, while Frank Gore was still really the main runner. Well, this data point that we just got this week really tells us something different, right? Because they only dropped back to pass 38% of the time, which is very, very, very low. So mostly they were going to run the ball this past weekend against the Redskins, which they were leading the game the whole way. They won it by 15. In that scenario, Devin Singletary saw 51% of the rushing attempts. Frank Gore only saw 28%. So I would have to agree with you, Drake. Last week, we really said, you got to kind of tap the brakes. It's not that we didn't like Devin Singletary as a player, but when we saw the 68% snap share, it was probably more due to game script. But when he got on the field, he did prove enough in week 8 where the coaching, it does look like the coaches have decided to really hand it over to him. Now, where Frank Gore was still heavily involved this past week was down inside the 5. He got 3 attempts versus Singletary's 2. That was Singletary's first 2 of the season. But the routes per dropback for Singletary over the last 2 weeks are really good, Drake, 72% and 61%, whereas that's just not how Frank Gore gets involved, and they're keeping TJ Yeldon inactive now that Singletary is back. And the target percentage is 18% and 20% of the targets.
It's good to see Josh Allen actually finding the running back, because that's something a year ago he wouldn't do.
Yeah. He's gotten better at throwing to the underneath stuff, right? I mean, he's done better with Cole Beasley. He's done better with, Devin Singletary. This last week you saw, Duke Williams was a healthy scratch because they wanted to get Isaiah McKenzie more involved, who was somebody that was really good for them down the stretch last year with Robert Foster. So now you got McKenzie, involved again. His average depth of target, is usually really close to the line of scrimmage as well. And he's a guy that they like to get involved in the running game. So it looks like they're moving away from some of these, I don't want to call them slower, but some of these less explosive players, and trying to get some of these playmakers on the field, such as Devin Singletary and Isaiah McKenzie. And, it is worth noting that they were coming off of a loss. And we haven't talked about this much this year, Drake, but last year we talked a lot about what coaches may do coming off of a loss, especially a team like Buffalo that only had lost 1 game before they lost the week before this past week, which is the week whenever they beat the Redskins. So, yeah, I think Singletary has definitely taken over the job. One other guy that's getting more love here, Drake, is you got Dawson Knox up to 76% of the snaps. So they've kind of made this youth movement. It's Isaiah McKenzie, getting on the field more. You've got Dawson Knox getting on the field more, and you've got Devin Singletary getting on the field more. Yeah. So they all happening at the same time.
Devin Singletary is a great value on Fantasy Draft, 9,500. You get a $100,000 cap over there. So if it's new to some of you guys, again, download the Fantasy Draft app. Come check it out. Use the code FFHustle, and we'll see you in there this week when we're playing in our 25-man contest. My boy, Dwain, the proud dad, on Sunday when I saw Damien Williams just take over that Kansas City backfield, out-touching McCoy 14-4. Had 120 yards rushing. All right, 91 of them came literally on one play, but erroneous. None of that matters, okay? He got a lot of the snaps. I don't care that he had like less than 3 yards of carry on the rest of his, besides the big 93-yard run. What do you make of this Kansas City backfield now? We're looking to get Patrick Mahomes back, so should be all systems go heading into the fantasy playoffs. Is Damien Williams taking over? Is he kind of the guy now? $10,000 on Fantasy Draft this week. Nice value.
I mean, that's the trend. His snaps have gone from 28 to 42 to 73% over the past 3 weeks, whereas McCoy's gone from 43 to 39 to 10%. I don't know if there's an injury or something involved, but when you watch LaShawn McCoy, he doesn't have that same explosion that he had earlier in the season. Really watching him these last 2 weeks, he almost looked kind of old. Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed with McCoy, and I don't think Andy Reid likes it, is just how he carries the football, and he's just very loose with it. And if you don't have a guy like Patrick Mahomes to make up for turnovers and things like that, you're trying to manage some of these tighter games with Matt Moore in at quarterback. Ball security is a big deal. It's a big deal anyway, but not having a guy like Mahomes to help you overcome those things, I think, is even bigger. So, it's hard to say with this Kansas City backfield. I mean, this is as good of a trend as you're going to see. 3-week trends are really what we look for, because that actually gives us a trend. And so Damien Williams he's positive in every area, Drake. I mean, his routes per drop back have gone from 23 to 41 to 53. His carries have gone from 33 to 35 to 67. So, I mean, everything looks good for him. It's just one of those deals where they do still have the other two guys involved, and I don't know all the details as to why this happened this way. It very well just could be this is what they want to do going forward. And I think that's the way you have to play it, right? If you're trying to play free agency, or if you're trying to play the trade market, all we can do is go on the data that we have. And right now he's got a very strong trend. It's just for whatever reason, I've got this thought in the back of my mind that next week it'll all be like back to a 3-way backfield. I don't know.
I mean, if you look, I was talking to a guy on Twitter about this because I posted about, how he only had, he had 11 other runs for 3.09 yards per carry. And then if you look at Damien 2 weeks ago, he went 9 rushes for 7 yards. And then last week he had a cheap touchdown. He only was 7 for 30. So it's not like he's dominating on the ground. And if he didn't have that crazy 91-yard run, he wouldn't have done jack this week either. So he's getting the snaps, but it's just not super productive.
Right.
So be careful out there. All right, let's move it along to the team who might be going to London, but they're tweeting out Wolf of Wall Street things saying that, damn it, we're staying here and all that. And that's the LA Chargers. And Melvin Gordon kind of looked like Melvin Gordon. By the way, go check out the Chargers feed, and it's pretty good. They're good at social media. So Melvin Gordon nearly doubled the snaps of Eckler, had 7 more touches. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we thought Melvin Gordon was dead. The line was bad. They got a tackle back this week. Is Melvin Gordon back? Is this a buy low guy? Well, I don't know if it's buying low, but buying below normal value of a first-round running back?
Well, I mean, I think we've been talking about Melvin Gordon and game script along with Austin Eckler really for the past 4 weeks, Drake. So, I mean, I think this is just finally the Chargers, and in a game where most people didn't expect it to happen, they ended up in a game script where they were leading. So, I mean, he had 53% of the rushing attempts versus the 2 weeks before, 76 and 67%. So he actually had a lower percentage, but the team ran the ball way more. They only dropped back to pass on 46% of the plays this week versus 71% in week 8 and 65% in week 7. So playing from ahead, this game played out well for Melvin Gordon. And so he edged out Eckler and snapped 63 to 34%. He had both guys had 2 attempts from inside the 5, right? So, I mean, Eckler still managed to put up 13 fantasy points in a PPR, but Melvin Gordon put up 26 because of the touchdowns. And so if you look at the situation, with Gordon playing and he's on the field more because they're leading, that also led to more routes per dropback, which he's gone from 31% to 43% to 55% over the last 3 weeks. But I think more of that is to do with game flow. So in these games where, last year we saw more of these games from the Chargers. Remember, I mean, the Chargers were beating some teams pretty good early in the season, and Melvin Gordon was off to this huge start. So I think that's all you're seeing here. And that's not a knock against Gordon. We've said Gordon really is the guy that's, in a lot of the situations going to get more touches. He wasn't doing much with them yet. Of course, the Packers seem to cure, all running back woes by running over the left side, of their defense over and over, which is amazing that can't be addressed. But that's a major issue for them. But yeah, Melvin Gordon is a guy that don't expect this every week. You need for the Chargers to play ahead like they did this last week. Otherwise, he's still going to be a bit of a shaky guy. I think he's at the point now where his floor is okay. I think his floor is like what you saw in week 7 and week 8, 11 points. And I think that's probably still the floor for Eckler, right? Is, these past 2 weeks, 10 to 13 points. But depending on the script, if it's a shootout or if they're getting, beat heavily, it'll be Eckler that has the chance to have the upside for the 20, 25 point game. If they're leading, by 3 points, or if they're blowing another team out, then those are going to be the games where I think you're going to see Melvin Gordon be the guy that has a chance to put up 25 points. So unfortunately, those things are hard to predict. I put out a post each week, on my Twitter feed, about all the Vegas lines, and the expected points for each team. So, I mean, you can look at things like that, but those things aren't always correct, as people know.
So they're going to play Thursday night against Oakland. Now, you mentioned the Packers defense. They're going to get Christian McCaffrey on Sunday. So I got a feeling his price on some sites might be rather high. He's $19,200 is McCaffrey on Fantasy Draft. So to squeeze him into some lineups is going to be tough, but he could go for another 40 points against this Packers defense who can't stop anybody. Let's keep it rolling here. It's been announced Ronald Jones, the hustle favorite, I guess, is going to get more carries here. He had 18 of the 23 running back carries for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this weekend. I mean, is he super talented? I don't think so, but he's going to play Arizona this week. He's at home. They say he's going to get the rock, so yippee-ki-yay. Let's go, Ronald Jones.
Yeah, I mean, all you can do is trust, Arians, for his comments. And, I mean, they already showed it this past week. 55% of the snaps, 69% of the rushing attempts, ran a route on 36% of Jameis Winston's dropbacks, which was a season high for Ronald Jones, whereas Peyton Barber only saw 4% in that area. And then, your boy Ogunbowale, he even actually saw a little bit less work, but he is the guy that got the rushing attempt inside the 5. He also had one of those in week 8, whereas Ronald Jones has 0 rushing attempts inside the 5 over the last 3 weeks. He only has 2 on the season. So it does look like Barber or Ogunbowale could still be kind of a pain in the butt in that area. And then Ogunbowale could also still be taking on some of the passing work. So it looks like Ronald Jones may need to break a big play, Drake, really, to show value, even with these additional carries. He's also dealing with a bad offensive line, but it will be good just to see, does Ronald Jones, with more volume, can he get in a rhythm? Can he just finally pay off, right, on some of the talent that the Bucs saw whenever they drafted him in the second round 2 years ago? I think that's what they want to know at this point. They basically need to know, can Ronald Jones be our guy if we just go ahead and give him the chance here? Can he do it? Because they know what they have in Peyton Barber. They know what they don't have in Peyton Barber. I think Ronald Jones, they still have some questions, and I think they just want to see, is he one of those guys that if you just go ahead and give him the role and he has confidence in that, because different guys react different to different situations. If that happens, is he a guy that gains confidence, and becomes a better player? Well, we'll see. As far as fantasy goes, he's a player that, he's probably available in some of the small to mid-sized leagues.
You're going to prioritize him? If you got to pick up a running back this week, would you pick up Balaj or Ronald Jones? I
would rather have Ronald Jones than Balaj, just because this is an offense that's going to score more, and things, are pliable. Things can change. All of a sudden, if Ronald Jones starts getting the rushing attempts inside the 5, this is a team that gets down into the red zone quite a bit with the Bucs. Yeah, they turn it over, but they move the ball up and down the field. I mean, for Christ's sakes, they have two fantasy receivers in the top 5 or 6, in fantasy football between Godwin and Evans. So, I mean, this is a team that can move the ball. So I definitely would prefer to have Ronald Jones.
Some scary stuff going on here in New York with the Jets. And I say scary, I should say shady. So LeVeon Bell went and had an MRI done on his knee. Now, Joe Douglas came out and said, oh, he's fine, blah, blah, blah. They elevated Josh Adams, formerly of the Eagles, from their practice squad, saying we didn't want to lose him to anyone else. That's BS. That's nonsense. You don't add a guy to become now your fourth running back because you're afraid of losing him. So behind Le'Veon Bell, and we won't know anything on him for probably a few days, you have Ty Montgomery, who got banged up on a special teams play, and you also have the ageless Bilal Powell, who I can't believe is still on this roster. But it seems every year at the end of the season, someone's starting Bilal Powell in fantasy, and he's putting up points. What do you make of this situation? Would you throw $1 or $2 at one of these backs? And, I mean, there's a lot of routes to be run and targets to be had if Le'Veon Bell is not in the lineup anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this move could have been made more due to the Ty Montgomery issue, right? Because Montgomery, once he got dinged up, I don't think he came back into the game at all this past week. So I think that's the other possibility here. But I'm with you, Drake. Whenever I first heard it, I just kind of thought, man, that doesn't add up. I don't own Le'Veon Bell very much. I think on like 1 or 2 teams, so I don't really have to worry about it too much. But if I were a Le'Veon Bell owner, yeah, I do not like this news at all. And yeah, Bilal Powell, I think is, he's the guy that I would go put a couple of bucks on.
Okay.
It's like you said, he's the ageless wonder. The guy, every chance Bilal Powell's been given, it's like the guy just comes through.
Always.
Yeah, it's crazy.
He's in every week 15 fantasy lineup for the last 5 years.
Yes, exactly. So Powell's a guy that, we know can do it. He's got a diverse skill set that kind of mirrors, what Le'Veon Bell can do. He's decent runner. He's a good pass receiver out of the backfield. He's dependable in pass protection. He's a veteran. He would be the guy, that I would target, personally. But, I could be completely wrong. I just think of Adams as being more of the hammer guy, right? What we won't see. I doubt we see either. If Bell's out, I don't think we'll see anybody taking on 90% of the snaps. They're going to split it up between these guys.
Yeah,
but
Josh Adams can't catch at all.
Right. So I think it would be more likely, Powell and Adams sharing, that load, together, especially if Ty Montgomery is out. And I haven't seen anything new on Montgomery. We'll have to watch the injury reports the rest of this week.
Interesting. Check that out. And Jets play the Giants this Sunday at 1:00. Another guy who might be on your waiver wire, and he's on bye this week, but he looks to return, is Darius Geis, the second-year running back for the Redskins. If he returns after the bye, how does he eat into Adrian Peterson's workload? Because we know their coach wants to run the rock, and then run the rock some more. And AP actually hasn't been horrible. I think he has, of his last 4 games, 2 of them have been, or his floor is like 74 yards, and he's had over 102 of them. Do they kind of kick AP to the curb and say we want to roll with Geis, or what? I mean, let me know. Is this a guy in Geis that you want to have stashed on the end of your bench on a bad team?
Not really. Just because the Redskins, I mean, it's like you said, Peterson's had 2 100-yard weeks, and I don't even want him. So what else
in the league? I'm like, I'm never going to start this guy.
I mean, honestly, though, so if that's what Adrian Peterson has done, and you don't want to own him or start him in a league, then what do you want with Darius Geis? Look, I like Geis as a player, but he's definitely had his issues with injuries. I think Peterson is playing well enough that it will probably still be somewhat of a timeshare, because I think the Redskins do like Darius Geis, and I don't know that they necessarily feel like they need to see what they have in him. Like some of the situations that we talked about earlier. I think they know what they have. So it's a question of, do they just want to make the youth movement and put him at risk for being hurt? I mean, I think Geis is going to be part of their plans heading into next year. Mm-hmm. So I think I see this situation a little bit differently. Again, this could be completely wrong. We don't have any trends or anything to really go off of here, but I think you're going to see more of a split between Peterson and Geis. And even if Geis fully takes over the backfield, Washington is so bad. It's just tough to squeeze much value, out of this position, even when the back is performing well, like what we saw with Adrian Peterson.
Other premium handcuffs you might want to consider, because in week 10 here, it is about roster construction. We did get a question in our chat room here about rest of the season lineups and roster construction and how you want to have your bench look going into the playoffs. But if these guys, again, we say it every week, are on your wire, you want to stick them on the end of your bench. Alexander Mattison, Raquel Armstead, Tony Pollard, Rashad Penny, Reggie Bonifant. If those guys are out there, they should be picked up, stashed on your bench, because they're one injury away from being a top 10 running back and really putting you over the hump in the fantasy playoffs. So this is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland of EstablishTheRun.com. You can head over there and you can read Dwain's great work. And the reason that we love plugging that great work is because we want you to go read it. Go to EstablishTheRun.com, use promo code HUSTLE20, and that's going to get you 20% off weekly, monthly, or rest of the season subscription packages from Evan Silva, Adam Levitan, all the smart, amazing talent over at Establish the Run. Dwain, how's that utilization report article going, man? It looks like you're getting a ton of clicks and great feedback.
Yeah, it's been great so far. Much thanks to all the folks that have reached out to me about it, all the kind words. Just something that I'm super excited to be doing. It's kind of hard to believe, Drake. When you and I first started talking a year ago at this time, a little bit before this, and I was doing those utilization reports, and I would have like 2 or 3 people, like them, on Twitter or say something. And, I've kind of tweaked and played around with them since then. But like now, I've been super busy the last 2 weeks. But last week I was actually able to put one out for every team on Twitter. Yeah. And it's crazy the response that it gets. Each one of them gets, a ton of views, gets retweets, gets likes, gets a lot of interaction from folks. So it's something that people like and I enjoy doing. So I'm happy about it.
Yeah. Again, Hustle20 over at EstablishTheRun.com. I love their podcasts that they put out. If you like the Fantasy Football Hustle, you'll love the stuff that Evan and Adam are putting out over at EstablishTheRun.com. I want to quickly squeeze in a tight end segment here, Dwain, because this is actually a pretty good week for tight ends. You might have one of these guys on bye, Ertz is on bye, and Noah Fant's on bye, and Goddard's on bye. But the Ravens, I'm watching this game on Sunday as I drive back, and I just keep seeing him throw the ball to Nick freaking Boyle. So Nick Boyle plays 59 snaps to Mark Andrews 24, and sprinkle in Hunter. I want to always say Hunter Hurst Helmsley.
Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst, Triple H here. So he got 29 snaps. What the hell's going on with these guys? I mean, am I going to have to start picking up Nick Boyle and plugging into a lineup, or was this just a function of who the Patriots were taking away?
Yeah, I think it was more of a function of that, because the Patriots, we know that's their MO. They're going to take away your top weapon. So heading into this past week with Marquise Brown having missed the games previous to that game, I think Mark Andrews was clearly the guy that they wanted to stop. Now, Andrews played a season low 34% of the snaps, Drake. He ran a season low 50% of routes per dropback of Lamar Jackson. So he was a little less involved. I don't know if maybe there was an injury going on that we don't know about, or he may be nursing something, or maybe it was just to do with leading, by 17 points. But, the Ravens have led in some games big before this season, and we haven't seen this kind of thing. But no, it's not something that I would trust. I think, they're going to continue to rotate all 3 guys, but I think Andrews easily will still be the top guy to own. We saw a couple of games like this last season too, Drake, where Boyle just happened to pop up, but it's just really hard to predict which games that's going to be. He'll very easily be back in the 3 to 5% range next week. And then, you might see one more week like this for the rest of the regular season, and that'll be it.
They're on bye, but the Philadelphia Eagles have 2 viable tight ends. Zach Ertz, who finally came through, 11 targets, 9 for 103 and a touchdown. Dallas Goedert, 4 for 39. Both played 70 snaps, so that was encouraging to see if you're a Goddard owner. Deshaun Jackson essentially done for the season. This offense is so compressed. There's no speed. They have absolutely no one who can stretch the field. They spent a second-round pick on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and he can't get a snap. So it's a lot of 12 personnel. Dallas Goedert, if somebody drops him this week, scoop him up. Never know for this stretch run. And if Zach Ertz ever gets hurt, holy smokes, now you're really cooking with some gas. Dwayne, I want to ask you about Indianapolis, because we have an issue where Jacoby Brissett is banged up. Brian Hoyer came in relief. T.Y. Hilton's hurt. Paris Campbell's hurt. So outside of now Zach Pascal, are either of these tight ends a little more viable. We have Jackie Doyle, 55 snaps. Ebron only played 24 snaps, though. I figured Ebron, they need pass catchers, would be on the field more. What the hell's going on in Indy?
Yeah, they're very stubborn about that. They have a specific role that they like for Ebron, and they don't venture outside of it. And it's not different than last year. It's just that we've seen touchdown regression, with Ebron, and obviously now you're playing with Jacoby Brissett and a less explosive offense versus playing with Andrew Luck.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jack Doyle, what's interesting is his routes per dropback, 2 out of the last 3 weeks, Drake, 73% and 76%. He's been up in a really, a pretty solid territory as far as, tight ends go. You'd like to see 80 to 90%, but anytime you can get up outside of the 60s, that's pretty good. And so for Doyle, we've seen 2 out of the last 3 weeks that's happened for him. 13% of the targets, then 20%, and then 13%, in week 9. So yeah, if you're looking for a guy to stream, Jack Doyle's fine. He also had a target in the end zone this last week. That was his second one of the season. But I think the guy really to own is Pascal. I mean, he's the guy that 2%, 94% of the snaps, even before all the injuries this past week. Routes per dropback, 91% and 97%. He had 16% of the targets this last week. He also had another target inside the 5. Paris Campbell was a guy that I was really excited about seeing him get to come back. And then, man, that was such a bummer, seeing him, break his hand, because I thought he was a guy that you would want to potentially have on your roster headed down the stretch run, into the fantasy playoffs, a young guy with some juice in his legs, but that just didn't quite work out. So now you're stuck with, Chester Rogers, who played quite a few snaps. He's the guy that operates out of the slot, but, it's going to be tough to squeeze much value, out of Chester Rogers. He's a smaller guy. He's not going to get as many looks, down inside, the 5-yard line. Although this past week he did have an end zone target. He and Pascal and Jack Doyle all had a target in the end zone. Brian Hoyer flinging the ball around, Drake. 3 touchdown passes by Hoyer. And then Deion Kane will be the other guy, right, that'll start to work back in. But, he kind of got his shot earlier in the season. And Deion Kane was a guy that a lot of draft nicks loved last year. Coming in, and then Deion Kane got hurt in the preseason. So I know a lot of dynasty guys that have held on to Kane for this time. And so it looks like he'll get another shot as well. But like I said, earlier in the season, he had some opportunities whenever nobody else was stepping up, and Hilton was hurt before, and he just couldn't quite do much with it. So yeah, I think Jack Doyle and Pascal are the 2 places that you put your chip as far as this passing game goes for the next few weeks.
Did Ryan Kelly get hurt in that game, the center for the Colts? I think that's something just to monitor for their passing game and for Marlon Mack out there. He's a hell of a player. Just something to monitor. Another guy who may have gotten dropped because he was on bye is Jared Cook. So if you're dying at tight end, he has Drew Brees back now. He only got to play about 6 quarters or so with him, I think, this season. Do you have any hope for Jared Cook in this Saints offense?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the Saints offense. I mean, I think he's a great guy to pick up and stream if he's going to play, this week. So I have no problems with Jared Cook.
What about Noah Fant? Since Emmanuel Sanders is traded, he's played 84% of the snaps. He's got a 25% target share. And over these past 2 weeks, he's tight end 6. So Noah Fant, somebody who is probably on most waiver wires. And I know my buddy there, FF Stompy, who won the Scott Fish Bowl a year ago, saw him out at the Kings Classic. He's been beating his chest for Noah Fant all season. It looks like finally this guy is going to become a thing.
Yeah, it's just Emmanuel Sanders being gone. I talked about him on the RSP Fantasy Film and Data podcast 2 weeks ago with Jay Moyer.
Glad you said it. I didn't have to.
Yeah, I know. He's a guy that I talked about on that podcast as being someone that would, have an opportunity to really step up his game with the departure of Emmanuel Sanders based on the way this offense runs, right? This is a Rick Scangarello runs the offense. It's a offshoot of the Kyle Shanahan style of offense. So we know they like to get their athletic tight ends out into space. They use the play action game. They use bootlegs, all those sort of things. So yeah, everything looks good for Fant. The snaps have gone from 72 to 82 to 85. The routes per dropback, 69 to 75 to 76%. The targets, I have a slightly different number than you on the targets, but I don't know what's up with that, but 15, 19, and then 20%, so he's been one of the top targets on the team behind Cortland Sutton for these past 3 weeks. And I think he's a guy that for down the stretch, they've got quarterback concerns, but with how bad tight ends look, you can do worse than Noah Fant.
Yeah, no question about it. And just wanted to circle back here, folks, and let you know that Fantasy Draft is the only rake-free daily fantasy site in the business. They're, again, bringing the heat this weekend with a $300,000 guaranteed rake-free contest, the Hooters main event, with its $50,000 first place payout. Think about this. So you can get into this contest, and there's no rake, and there's a first place payout of $50,000. That is pretty damn sweet right there. So, Dwayne, have you gotten into fantasy draft at all? I know we talked about it a little before the show, and you said a lot of your high stakes buddies are really into fantasy draft.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys in the community that I interact with that, have spoken very highly, about the site. So I'm excited about trying it out. I haven't tried it out yet this season, but I'm going to this weekend with you.
Yeah, so the days of paying 10, 20, 16% of your entry fee to these fantasy companies are over. You're not worried about losing 30% of your bankroll to the house. I want you to go over, sign up at fantasydraft.com with our referral code FFHustle. You'll get a 7-day free trial on your first $1,000 of rake-free entries. That's fantasydraft.com, referral code FFHustle. Don't miss your shot at a million and millions in rake-free contests this season. Start playing on Fantasy Draft today. Your bankroll is going to love it. I want you to follow our accounts at FF Hustle, at Drake Fantasy, and of course at Dwain McFarland. We'll be tweeting out links to not only this big Hooters entry contest, but our personal 25-man Fantasy Football Hustle contest. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to be the guy that wins the inaugural Fantasy Draft FF Hustle contest. So I'm really going to do some studying this week and get into the money on that. Let's switch over to wide receivers now, Dwayne. And a guy that I'm a big fan of is Josh Reynolds for the Rams. Brandon Cooks, we don't know how long he's going to be out with this concussion issue. We hope the best for him, but God only knows. If Josh Reynolds is the play, he's a guy who over the past few years has come in and scored touchdowns, got targets. He can put up 50 to 100 yards at the drop of a hat. I like him. I think he's a wide receiver, borderline 3-4 for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. I mean, it hasn't quite worked that way, right, for the Rams this year, and we've talked about this, I won't beat a dead horse, but due to the emergence of Gerald Everett, there's really 4 guys now, so you don't know who's going to be left out. Josh Reynolds will obviously be at risk of being that guy, just like Brandon Cooks has been that guy that's been left out multiple times. We've seen Robert Woods left out. Robert Woods in week 8, only 6% of the targets. But Josh Reynolds had 26%, which was second to Cooper Kupp's 32%. So he is a guy that clearly we have seen the fact that Jared Goff will trust him. He is willing to go to him. He is a bigger receiver. Brandon Cooks is a small, fast guy. Josh Reynolds is a guy that, he plays with his length. And so he's always going to have an opportunity to get red zone and end zone targets. He had 2 end zone targets in week 8, which led the team. He's the only guy that had end zone targets in that game. So, yeah, I think Josh Reynolds, absolutely. I think that's a great one to bring up because I even noticed in my high-stake leagues last week, Drake, a lot of people left him on the wire just because they couldn't pick him up because of the bye week. And so he's going to be a guy that's still out there, and I would definitely prioritize him as one of the receivers I would want to own.
Let me ask you this, because you watch a lot of the film and know how these guys are used. Is he sliding directly into Brandon Cooks' spot, or is someone else moving over? Because these guys all kind of have defined roles. How is he being used in the offense?
Yeah, he's keeping a role similar to Brandon Cooks, even though his style is different, and the way he wins is different on a football field than the way Brandon Cooks wins. His application is slightly different. But if you look at his average depth of target, 14.3 for the season. So if you look at week 8, he was an 18, and Brandon Cooks is the guy that's been stretching the field. So they asked Josh Reynolds to do that. Now, he's clearly being used a little bit more in the red zone and in the end zone than what Brandon Cooks was, but that's because, of his size. So overall, yeah, his role's very similar. They want to use him in a similar way to the way that they were using Brandon Cooks.
It's been reported that Adam Thielen is likely to miss week 10. Olabisi Johnson, a guy who caught a touchdown last week, would stand to slide right into that role. A few weeks ago, BC Johnson was a guy that everyone was trying to squeeze into lineups, and he did, jack squat. So now, of course, the week nobody plays him, he comes in and scores. Any interest in scooping him up and plugging him into your lineups, or is it too volatile with an offense that still wants to run the ball a ton?
It would have to be a super deep league, but in that kind of format, yeah, I think, he's a guy that if you really had to put him in a pinch, you could. last week he only had 5% of the targets, despite playing, running a route on 85% of the dropbacks. The week before, 87% of the dropbacks, and he had 8% of the targets. So the guys that we've seen benefit the most with Adam Thielen being hurt has really been the tight ends. If you look at the two tight ends over the last 3 weeks together, Rudolph and Irv Smith, 36%, 24%, and 29% target share. So really with Thielen out, they're now going to Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. And Kyle Rudolph had 3 targets inside the 5, or had 3 targets in the end zone this last week. So I think Rudolph or Irv Smith are just as likely to be one of the guys that cash in. Obviously, Stephon Diggs, is a guy that will get more looks. But, we saw this past week for the first time without Thielen, Stephon Diggs, the Chiefs had a plan, to really try to shut down Stephon Diggs, and they did a good job. He only had 11% of the target share despite leading the team in routes per dropback.
Davante Adams was back for the Green Bay Packers, and it looked like everyone else is just toast at this point. I don't think there's a secondary receiver in this offense that you can have on your roster and feel good about ever putting in your lineup now that Davante Adams is back. Is there anything about that that's wrong, Dwayne?
No, we would need to see something change. The one thing I will say is that, Valdez-Scantling and Allison they've been banged up, and they've been hurt as well, but they've toughed it out because the team was without Davante Adams, and they needed somebody to be on the field. Valdez-Scantling and Allison were both on the injury report all the way up till Friday last week, so they could come back to health. There is a little bit of a positive trend for Marquise Valdez-Scantling right now. We saw the week before where Alan Lazard actually was the leader. And we had talked about this last week, how much of that was to do with MVS's injury. And so this past week, routes per dropback, MVS was second on the team at 69%, with Davante Adams at 87%. Well, actually, Jimmy Graham was second, technically, with 79%. But I think MVS is still I think he still has a chance, Drake, to work his way back into being the full-time, number 2 role once he's back to full health. But until we see it, and until we see that his snap counts and his routes per dropback get back up in the 80s and 90% range, I'm with you. It's just something that you can't trust, unless you're in a super deep league and it's just your only option because you'd rather not drop him. And so you're stuck having to play him kind of deal.
All right. So with 6 teams on bye, there's countless wide receivers that are going to be on benches this week, and I'm dying. I got to find somebody. Flip a coin. Can I put one of these Titans receivers in my lineup this week, or am I just begging for 3 points?
There's always the risk of the 3 points. But if I'm going to put a guy in, I think, we're at the point now. I mean, and really we've been here for a few weeks. But AJ Brown, is the guy that you're probably going to want to play. But now actually his routes per dropback, 80%, Drake, led the team for the first time this season. His 69% of the snaps was still slightly behind Corey Davis. But if you talk about the guy that's in a route whenever they're dropping back to pass, he was the top option on the team. He also led the team in targets with 18% this last week. He's got a target inside. He's got an end zone target in each of the last 2 weeks. He's now got 4 on the season. His average depth of target is right around on 11. So, I mean, this is a guy that seems to have got a little bit of mojo going right now with Ryan Tannehill. And he hasn't truly exploded yet. He's scored 12, 9, and 12 points. Corey Davis has scored 23 and 9. So, I mean, Davis is in a similar range, but I just feel like A.J. Brown at this point is the guy that's got the big play upside, Drake. So if I was going to use one of the two, I'm preferring A.J. Brown.
A couple of weeks ago, everybody was blowing their fab wad on Ty Johnson, and he did lead the team with 62% of the snaps. They've since put Trey Carson on IR, so hopefully this kind of narrows the running back tree here where it's Ty Johnson and it's JD McKissack. McKissack with 25% of the carries. He's more of a third down scat back. What do you see here in Detroit? Are any of these guys worth either, if they're on your wire, picking up like a McKissack? And would you feel comfortable putting any of those guys into a lineup?
No, Ty Johnson's still the only one that I would even feel, decent about, just throwing him out there. And that's just because he was in a role similar to what we saw the week that Carry-On went down, which, he's playing the majority of the snaps. You already mentioned that. He sees almost half of the rushing attempts, at 45%. His routes per dropback are very good at 55%. JD McKissack is really just a change of pace back. And I just don't trust that. It'd be kind of like playing Rex Burkhead right now, really, for, the Patriots, and nobody wants to do that. I wouldn't want to do it with JD McKissack either. Ty Johnson, obviously we really don't want to have on the field at this point, but the volume and the other indicators are there. He just hasn't had the stats to go along with it, so he scored 10, 5, and 7 points over the last 3 weeks.
So now I want to talk about a couple of quarterback streamers. Again, you might be without Deshaun Watson. If you were playing Minshew or Brady or Wentz, you're looking for somebody to put in. Let's look no further than a game in the Meadowlands, MetLife Stadium. Daniel Jones takes on Sam Darnold. Either guy, screw it. Whoever's available, take him. I don't care. They both stink. The Jets just put corner Tremaine Johnson on IR. And I think Daniel Jones is playable. He's got weapons out there. He'll fumble it here and there, but
he's almost like he's like a poor man's version of Jameis Winston. He's going to turn the ball over, but the Giants have done a decent job of moving the football. We know that they can score points. So yeah, I'm with you. I see no issue with that. I mean, another guy that I've seen out there on waivers quite a bit is Phillip Rivers. He gets Oakland this week. That's a plus 7.6 points per game in a normal PPR setup. Oakland gives up quite a bit to opposing quarterbacks. Indianapolis, if you're in a super deep like skank league, you've got them playing against Miami. So if Hoyer has to go, he's going to be available. So those are all those guys are all worthy of consideration depending on how deep your league is.
Yeah. Tannehill's going to throw it 40 times probably with the Chiefs this week, and Nick Foles is probably available. He's on bye this week, but if you got room to stash a guy, there's my man BDN ready to rock and roll. Just some other news coming down here. LeVeon Bell will not practice on Wednesday. So take that for what you will as you're looking for your waiver wires bids this week. Anything else, Dwayne, that we missed from the utilization report?
No, I think we hit most of it. If folks want to get anything else that I don't happen to have here on the pod, they can go over and they can see that at Establish the Run. Of course, I provide work with at Matt Waldman RSP. I'll be doing a podcast over there this Thursday with Jay Moyer, and then also at Football Guys.
Love it. And folks, I can't stress it enough. Download that Fantasy Draft app. Use the code FFHustle. We're going to have a 25-man listener league. Follow our accounts at Drake Fantasy, at Dwayne McFarland, and you'll find the link. We'll get you in there. We're going to play. We're going to have some fun and win some cash. Thanks so much to the folks at Fantasy Draft for sponsoring the show. We're so happy to have them. And that's going to wrap it up for Dwayne McFarland. I am Brian Drake. Never get out hustled, folks. Good luck in Week 10.